From an underwater explosion to a large amount of explosives detonating on a cargo ship, or even the explosion of an entire factory.
And that's it. I am Mr. Erase. Don't forget to subscribe and share if you enjoy any of the upcoming videos.
This video will compile 5 scenes of extremely large non-nuclear explosions. Ripple Rock was a dangerous underwater mountain located near Campbell River, British Columbia. For decades, it caused numerous serious maritime accidents that killed hundreds of people, forcing the Canadian government to take action. From 1875 to 1958, over 120 ships were damaged or sunk after striking Ripple Rock, resulting in at least 110 deaths. The need to remove the rock had been raised since the 19th century, but it wasn't until the 1950s that the Canadian government approved a plan to destroy it using explosives. After failed attempts in 1943 and 1945, a large-scale demolition project began in 1955. 75 workers spent nearly 3 years drilling a 500-foot vertical shaft from Maud Island and a horizontal tunnel over 700 meters long, reaching the base of Ripple Rock. 2 additional tunnels were drilled to the rock's 2 peaks. More than 1,270 tons of Nitromex 2H explosives were placed in storage chambers. At 9:31 a.m. on April 5, 1958, the explosion took place. It produced a column of smoke and rock over 300 meters high, displacing more than 635,000 tons of rock and water. The seafloor was leveled by 45 feet, allowing ships to pass through safely. The explosion was broadcast live nationwide by CBC, becoming one of Canada's first televised events.
375,000 tons of rock are hurled into the air in one of the biggest non-atomic explosions in the history of man.
The blast was a complete success, lowering the top of Ripple Rock to nearly 50 feet below the surface at low tide.
Despite its massive scale, the explosion caused little damage, only a small wave 7.6 meters high and some dead fish. No one was injured or killed thanks to thorough safety precautions. Ripple Rock was completely destroyed, clearing a once dangerous shipping route. Today, dozens of large cruise ships pass through the area daily, an achievement made possible by a historic engineering operation. On July 17, 1944, a series of unsafe conditions and systemic negligence culminated in one of the most devastating homefront tragedies in American history. At the Port Chicago Naval Magazine in California, 2 cargo vessels, the SS E.A. Bryan and the SS Quinault Victory, were docked and preparing for deployment. The Bryan was already packed with more than 4,600 tons of live explosives, including aerial bombs and anti-aircraft munitions. An additional 400 tons of ammunition waited nearby in rail cars scheduled for transfer. The loading was being handled almost entirely by young African-American sailors. These men had received little to no formal training in handling munitions and were working under poor safety protocols. They faced intense pressure from commanding officers to load as quickly as possible, often with speed valued above safety. At precisely 10:18 p.m., a loud metallic clang was heard, followed by the sharp crack of breaking wood. Moments later, a massive explosion ripped through the night sky. Witnesses from miles around reported a flash of light, followed by a thunderous boom that shattered windows and shook buildings. The force of the detonation was so extreme that it registered as a 3.4 magnitude earthquake on the Richter scale. The explosion instantly destroyed everything within a 1,000-foot radius. Both ships were obliterated, as were the surrounding docks and facilities. A total of 320 people were killed on site, including 202 black sailors who had been working the night shift. Hundreds more were injured. The blast was equivalent to approximately 5,000 tons of TNT, making it the worst stateside disaster of World War II. In the weeks that followed, tensions between the Navy and surviving black sailors grew. When ordered to resume loading munitions under the same dangerous conditions, 258 sailors refused. Of those, 50 were singled out and charged with mutiny, a charge that carried the risk of the death penalty. The trial was one of the largest of its kind in U.S. military history. Despite widespread criticism and growing public concern, including from civil rights activists and future Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, all 50 men were convicted and sentenced to prison terms of up to 15 years. After the war in 1946, they were finally granted clemency. Still, it wasn't until 1999 that one of the accused, Freddie Meeks, received a full presidential pardon from President Bill Clinton. The others remained officially convicted. The Port Chicago disaster, and especially the mutiny trial, marked a critical turning point in both U.S. civil rights history and military policy. Public pressure and internal review led the Navy to begin desegregating its units in 1945. Then, on July 26, 1948, President Harry S. Truman issued Executive Order 9981, officially ending racial segregation within the armed forces. Today, Port Chicago stands not only as a memorial to lives lost, but also as a symbol of justice long delayed and of change finally set into motion. On the southeastern edge of Las Vegas, amid the scorching deserts of Nevada, stood a facility that once quietly supported the dream of space exploration. It was the Pacific Engineering and Production Company of Nevada, better known as PEPCON, a plant that produced a critical component for NASA's Space Shuttle program, ammonium perchlorate, a powerful oxidizer used in solid rocket fuel. But it was this very fuel of the stars that, on one fateful day in May, turned the entire area into a living hell in a matter of seconds. After the Challenger space shuttle disaster in 1986, the U.S. space program was put on hold, leaving PEPCON stockpiling thousands of tons of unused rocket propellant. By May 1988, the facility was essentially sitting on a massive ticking time bomb, over 4,500 tons of ammonium perchlorate, equivalent in energy to a small nuclear weapon right in the middle of the desert. On the morning of May 4, 1988, a welding spark accidentally ignited a nearby container of fuel, triggering the beginning of the disaster. The facility lacked an adequate fire suppression system for this type of chemical, and within minutes, the blaze had spiraled out of control. Workers fled in panic, but Roy Westerfield, the plant operations manager, stayed behind to call 911, a decision that made him one of the 2 people killed in the explosion. Meanwhile, a cameraman on nearby Black Mountain captured the entire incident. Within minutes, a series of powerful explosions tore through the site, 7 in total, including a massive blast with an estimated yield of 25 kilotons of TNT, roughly equivalent to a tactical nuclear detonation. A gigantic mushroom cloud rose from the site, sending debris and dust flying for kilometers. The shockwave shattered windows nearly 10 miles, 16 kilometers away, and caused widespread tremors throughout the area. Residents in Las Vegas were left in confusion. Many believed a nuclear attack had just occurred. The aftermath was described as being indistinguishable from a war zone. The entire Henderson industrial complex was leveled. More than 400 people were injured, 2 lost their lives, and hundreds of homes were damaged across several miles. The force of the blast was so powerful that many believed a nuclear explosion had occurred just outside Las Vegas. The explosion not only claimed lives and injured hundreds, but also left a lasting mark on the American public, especially those living in the Las Vegas area at the time. Images of the mushroom cloud, the deafening noise, and the chain of secondary explosions captured from afar have since become crucial documentation, serving as a stark warning to the entire chemical industry, not just in Nevada, but around the world. In the aftermath of the disaster, regulations on the storage and handling of powerful oxidizers like ammonium perchlorate were significantly tightened. Many similar facilities were forced to reevaluate their safety standards and their proximity to residential areas. Though it lasted only a few minutes, the Pepcon explosion remains a powerful reminder of the high price paid when safety is compromised in favor of efficiency or profit. Throughout the 1960s, the United States and the Soviet Union engaged in a fierce space race, a battle not just of science, but of pride, prestige, and global influence. When the US announced the Apollo program with a bold promise to land a man on the moon, it was a declaration of technological supremacy. The Soviets couldn't stand idly by. In response, they launched the N-1 project, their final trump card, their desperate bid to reclaim the lead. Yet while NASA steadily advanced toward its goal, the USSR found itself entangled in a series of catastrophic failures, born from ambition that outpaced their engineering capabilities. Launched in 1965, the N-1 program involved thousands of engineers and hundreds of institutes across the USSR. Standing over 105 meters tall and powered by a staggering 30 engines in its first stage, the N-1 was among the most complex launch vehicles ever built. But political urgency, lack of proper testing, and the desperation to outpace the Americans exposed the project to fatal risks. The first launch took place on February 21, 1969. The 3L rocket lifted off from Baikonur under seemingly stable conditions. But just 68 seconds in, vibrations from the engines ruptured a fuel line, triggering a fire. The cord control system misinterpreted the situation as a pressure drop and shut down all 30 first-stage engines. With no thrust, the rocket plummeted and exploded mid-air, a small technical flaw with disastrous consequences. The second attempt on July 3, 1969, just weeks before Apollo 11, proved even worse. Seconds after liftoff, a fuel turbopump exploded, destroying the pipeline network. All engines shut down instantly. The rocket lost control, fell back onto the launch pad, and detonated in what became the largest non-nuclear explosion ever recorded, leveling the launch complex and shaking the surrounding area. The third launch on June 27, 1971, seemed promising as the 6L rocket climbed steadily for nearly a minute. But one of its first-stage engines caught fire. The control system failed to respond in time, and the resulting thrust imbalance caused the rocket to tilt. When stabilization became impossible, the ground crew triggered a self-destruct. The final attempt on November 23, 1972, featured an upgraded flight computer, the S-530. For the first 107 seconds, everything appeared to go smoothly, until an engine failure caused wild thrust oscillations. The rocket began to shake uncontrollably, and, like the three before it, the mission ended with a desperate command to self-destruct. Though it carried the hopes of reaching the moon, the N-1 program serves as a stark reminder that untested technology and political haste can lead to catastrophe. All 4 launches ended in failure, not a single success, forcing the Soviet Union to abandon its lunar dream. The N-1 remains one of the most expensive lessons in the history of space exploration. During the 1980s, Mexico experienced a period of rapid urbanization and industrialization, with residential neighborhoods springing up near industrial zones, often without long-term planning or clear safety standards. Pemex, the state-owned oil and gas company, was at the center of this modernization process. However, the pace of development far outstripped the country's risk management capacity. Infrastructure expanded without the necessary safety standards, creating an operational system full of latent dangers, waiting for a single incident to erupt into disaster. In the early hours of November 19, 1984, at the San Juan Ixhuatep area, commonly known as San Juanico, a Pemex complex of LPG, liquefied petroleum gas, suddenly exploded. The gas leak originated from a pipeline segment connecting the tanks, forming a massive gas vapor cloud that engulfed nearby residential areas. When the cloud met an ignition source, a powerful vapor cloud explosion occurred, triggering a chain of BLEV, boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion, blasts that rocked the northern outskirts of Mexico City. What made the disaster so devastating was not just the amount of LPG that leaked, but the way the entire system was designed and operated. The storage tanks were placed too close to one another, with no safety distances or fire break systems in place. Safety valves failed to function properly, and gas leak detection sensors were either inadequate or non-existent. Meanwhile, the fire suppression system was nearly useless, as water pressure was too low and the above-ground piping was fragile and prone to rupture. Moreover, the decision to expand operational capacity without corresponding upgrades to the safety system was a critical mistake. As demand for LPG rose, Pemex increased the throughput of pipelines feeding the site from other regions without improving pressure relief capacity or modifying operational protocols. In addition, due to uncontrolled urban growth, the San Juanico neighborhood, which had once been located at a safe distance from the facility, was gradually pushed up against the hazardous site, with no protective buffer zone in place. This was a textbook case of poor change management and uncontrolled urban planning. The explosion killed an estimated 500 to 600 people, injured more than 7,000 others, and leveled an entire neighborhood within a radius of several kilometers. Hundreds of homes were destroyed, many bodies were unidentifiable, and the storage tanks were blown apart, leaving behind a scene of devastation resembling a war zone. Public outrage forced Pemex to take responsibility and pay compensation. Subsequent international investigations revealed a long list of failures in design and safety management. While some new regulations were introduced in the aftermath, what remains most vividly is the painful memory, a stark reminder of the horrific price of neglecting safety.
And if you've watched up to this point, it means you've spent quite a bit of time watching this entire video. Thank you for that, and please hit the subscribe button as well as check out the video appearing on the screen. See you in the next video.